So now we have our panel number 3. Piers will be moderating a panel on Roadblocks to OpenFi with Ed, CEO of Instalabs, Rouven, ex-identity lead at Consensys, and Nicolas, head of DeFi at Etherlink.
Okay, so let's get started with some introductions. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, Rouven.
Yeah, I'm Rouven. I worked for Consensys for 8 years. I was previously with Deutsche Bank, tried to push crypto or like blockchain at the time within banking, which was very frustrating. So I joined Consensys, and it was very early. It was very interesting. But one of the most interesting parts for me was like identity. So my focus was decentralized identity. I was one of the founders from Uport, which was one of the early identity wallets which we're pushing for like we call meta transactions. We had like the wallet connect type flow, but it was all not standardized. It was all like the first time trying this. In the last 2 years, I'm mainly advising teams.
Thank you.
Hi guys, my name's Ed. I'm CEO of Instalabs. Is that not working? Perfect. Hey guys, my name's Ed. I'm CEO of Instalabs. We have 2 main products. The first is a regulated and compliant crypto asset bridge that sits between Ethereum and Radix. The second is an on-chain identity service called Instapass, which I'll probably mention as we kind of go into some of the questions.
Thank you very much, Ed. So you guys have already been introduced to me at the high level. I got into crypto in 2014, 2015, where I started mining in the Ethereum ecosystem, and then I sort of got hooked on smart contracts being this solution to all of the world's problems. And so then I started to build solutions within the blockchain space, which ended up being a Y Combinator company in 2017, which was then bought by Radix, and then I became CEO of Radix. And if we could introduce Nicolas as well.
Sorry for being late. It's a French thing. I'm here for Etherlink in particular. So I run DeFi for Tezos R&D hub based in London called Tech. You can think of it as Tezos Labs. And as part of my extended responsibilities, I also run the project called Etherlink, which is a L2 EVM compatible project that is enshrined and sits directly within the Tezos codebase, which is something that other L2s in other ecosystems are also looking into currently. Yeah, excited to be here.
Thank you very much. All right, so let's start it off with a sort of like a vision piece question, which is why is identity and identity primitives so important for blockchain? And what does it enable for OpenFi? Let's start off with you, Nicolas.
Sounds good. I think at the end of the day, what the space actually needs is users. We have 400 million plus users with a centralized exchange account that was funded over the past year. And we have about 2 million on-chain users as we speak. So that's obviously a very small fraction of the total addressable market. And in order to get a lot more normal users, let's call them this way, we need ways to know a little more about those users, because we might want to make some links with real-world assets, real-world sort of like ecosystems and context like this conference, for example. And for this to happen, you need to have a very UX-friendly way of sharing information about yourself, be it a KYC in a financial context, or proof of personhood, or anything like that. And that's something that we're missing at the current moment, and that IDOS, for example, would enable us to do relatively well.
So can I just ask a question on that? Like, why do you think that it's UX that's stopping users coming on? Like, why UX? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's. I think that's where you're getting at. It's a bit more than UX, but it's baking into a very nice UX some stuff that you've had in traditional finance and apps that people have had the opportunity to use like Revolut or Robinhood or others in Asia for a long time. So typically, like currently, what is the strength? I guess it goes to a more fundamental question, which is why are we here? Like, what is that space good at? And that space, in my case, because I'm biased and I'm a former trader and I'm in finance, a lot of the good things that we can do on chain are things around composability for what used to be DeFi and is slowly morphing into OpenFi. And that composability, if you're trying to do it right now, you're trying to like sign on for an app that lets you, for example, do an on-ramping from your Euro bank account to a Euro stablecoin. That's great, but now if you're trying to use any of the apps on-chain, you're going to have to take another KYC with that other provider or provide some information about yourself in a very encumbered, non-intuitive and time-consuming way. So having that kind of stuff can enable us within a self-custodial framework or some kind of self-custodial framework to actually offer a best of both worlds thing where we would have a little more use cases that are usable by more normal users, like users who are not experts in blockchain, don't know computer science much or anything like that, and could have it actually directly from the Google Play Store, the Apple App Store, things like that. That's what I meant, I guess.
Thank you very much. Rouven.
Yeah, I think we started in this Wild West where we did ICOs, everything was fun and like easy, and then you've seen more and more friends got like in trouble because they did the ICOs, and so within a very short period of time, everybody's like, okay, we need to do some KYC or something. So everybody added this friction because everybody was scared of like what happens in the real world to be compliant, all of this stuff. And then, so we've seen the workarounds where people then issue tokens on exchanges because you already KYC'd. So we moved away from this like cool decentralized way to back to like a more centralized way. I think when I show to like traditional finance people like how DeFi feels, if you go to a website and you connect your wallet and you see all of the stuff, and then you go to another one and you have the same but with a different angle or a different product, this is amazing. And then you say, okay, now you use it, and once you now hit anything real, like I mean, get your money on it, oh, now I need to onboard in MoonPay and do whatever. So I think there's so much friction always. And I think the added friction is now something we need to remove again. So I think that's where like building a system which can reuse this KYC, I think, is an interesting use case. That's the thing which everybody started asking since 2016. That was not my vision of like, hey, own your data, you can do so much more. But that was at least the, I think for this audience, the most practical, small, annoying piece of things we need to fix. And that's, I think, where hopefully we can make some progress now.
And what differs for you with Uport versus the IDOS system? And what do you feel like you learned when you were trying to do Uport with what is now being done right in this environment?
I think 2016, we were so early that nothing was really solved. Like we tried to solve like key management. We did what Arjun did. Like we paid the gas fees for like establishment list. You can rotate your key. That itself is a very hard problem, and I'm glad that the SAFE team is doing a great job here, in Arjun as well. And then we tried to like, okay, how do I ask a user for give me some credentials? There was no standard, there was no like nothing of like, how do you ask for it? How do you present it? Then the next piece was like, how do I even interact? Like there was no wallet connect at the time. So we built this like QR code scanning, but it was also not a standard. So I think we touched on most of the user experience pieces which are relevant, but everything was so like, I don't know, new and experimental that it was just very hard. And then the second thing was, at the time, people didn't really care about identity. They cared about wallets. They cared about the asset because that was the cool new thing to play around. And identity was just like always on the back burner. And only now we see with like we're merging into the real world and compliance is the thing that this becomes more relevant, at least in that, let's say, finance stack. There's a lot more in identity in my mind, what reputation system and social graph and civil resistance, you name it, is exciting. But I think it was just a lot of pieces which needed to be built as like core primitives. And I think we're getting to a point that now we can put them together and build actual solutions which are helping users to do something rather than, I don't know,
Yeah, I completely agree. I think to kind of give my perspective, I totally agree with Nicolas that growth in user numbers is really what's needed to take crypto to the next level. And I think we've probably saturated most of the kind of early adopter market, people who are going to be doing it because they love the technology, can understand the technology. We need to bring so many of the millions of retail users worldwide who currently use traditional banking into the crypto system. And we think about what OpenFi means from that perspective. They own their account and they can connect to all these different services, whether they're decentralized DeFi services, whether they're traditional finance services. And that brings so much more utility because you need a lot of utility to change user behavior. It can't be a kind of small incremental improvement. For users to be able to interact with all of those traditional financial services, they'll need to go through some kind of KYC. And to have to do it individually every single time, it's just going to be a really bad CX, and that's going to actually remove the additional utility you'd get from those interactions. And then if you think a little bit further, you think about real world assets, securities, investment products, all of those things have their own regulated checks that need to be done when you're dealing with users. And so again, having a way to, with a very simple, clear UX, manage that is going to be crucial. And then you actually end up with a system that has a lot more benefit for individual users than just keeping their funds in traditional banks.
Yeah, I think ultimately, like, we're looking at crypto with a market capitalization of like 2.5 trillion, which is great. But then you look at the global financial system and it's sort of sitting at like 400 trillion. And how do we get from here to there? The answer is absolutely identity, because if you want to play in that market, you have to have the ability to comply with the rules that allow you to play in that market. Which I think is really interesting in how the whole crypto space is evolving now, because we've gone from this idea of self-custodial, meaning like no compliance, to now self-custodial being the way in which you interact with composable applications on top of a public ledger. And I think that that sort of ethos change is a really important sea change in what's going to mean that everyday people can use Web3.
Yeah, what we have not talked about is really the institutional identity and other aspects of this. Like if in the future some company is issuing a bond, we rather know that it's actually the companies doing it, and then maybe even for like assets itself, like identity and like so on. That was less of a problem because we have tokens, so we can like track the assets. But like the institutional part is kind of like maybe not as dominant yet. But I think once we talk about real world assets, it becomes an increasingly important thing.
Yeah, 100%. And you've touched on reputation a couple of times and reputation systems. So like, why is reputation important to this? And where do you see reputations fitting in with OpenFi and how it differs from just pure identity?
I think it's all about like, how big is the risk to interact with someone? And the higher the reputation on the other side is, the easier. It's like, we trust MetaMask more than a wallet which has started last week, just because there's a reputation. If you have someone who has interacted with a certain smart contract, like Uniswap or something else, it has a certain reputation. If something is completely new, it's very hard. So you need to build like systems which allows you to identify, because it makes it easier for establishing the trust that you want to interact with the system. That's one part. And the second part, which I think is in the traditional world, people have like reputation in form of credit scores or some other mechanisms, or it's a known actor in a community, whatever it is, so that companies can give you like a non-collateralized like loan against something. Because honestly, I think a lot of the stuff we think in banking requires you to have already assets and you can lend against them. But the real world has a bunch of like uncollateralized loans. So the collateral in this case is just social, I don't know, score in some capacity, or at least like you're a known actor and you haven't really done anything bad. You have paid back your I don't know, loans in the past, and that's why you can be trusted.
Nicolas?
I'm actually not sure about this. I would want to think that this is the case, but to be honest, like if you're doing an uncollateralized loan, it means that someone in there is linked to the rule of law. Because if I give you a loan and you don't pay back tomorrow, I want to sue you and get you to actually pay back what you owe me. And if you have an intermediary who in any case is linked to the rule of law in that context, then you have the identity of the various players anyways, from off-chain, from on-chain, if you ask them some details or something. I think there is a need to potentially standardize what the information given looks like. And I think, for example, like DOS, once again, like does that quite well, where you have a clear standardized source of truth, of like what you consider to be true, provided on demand from the user or something. But I'm not sure, like, and I guess that's a gradient, and you put the cursor where you need it for a specific use case. But for the use case of under collateralized loans, to be honest, I think the only use of blockchain in that setup is that it can be liquidated quite easily if the things that you've put as collateral actually trades on chain as well.
Yeah,
But maybe I'm wrong there.
I was not referring to blockchain. I was saying, like, I think that someone issues to you a loan, they need to have something which reduces the risk. It's all about, like, how much is the
I
cost
see,
for the
okay.
capital, how much do I pay per month back, and how high is the risk that I default on it. And there are different mechanisms to establish the trust, whether you're like an on-chain trader and people have seen that you have whatever millions, that's maybe a way. But what I'm referring to is like a more traditional way to establish that you are like a trustworthy individual to pay back.
But this is actually a great example of how, by bringing some of these activities on chain, you can create a better version of the traditional product. Because you can have a situation where you've got your on-chain trust score that you've built up over a lot of time, and that's valuable. And then if you're taking out even an on-chain loan and they're combining it with off-chain checks using your identity, then actually I as a loan provider would definitely be able to offer you a lower risk-adjusted rate if you're also staking your reputation on the line. That's something you can't do in traditional finance. I fill out a loan application form, they don't get my reputation with my friends and family and any other things, do they? So actually it could improve the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, depends on which country you're in. Like like in Germany, there's a more like you are okay until you have like a misbehavior, and then you get like an entry in a central registry of like, hey, hasn't paid back certain things. And in the US, it's the other way around. You need to work and pay back credit for a long time to establish this. And if you then fail to do it, you get like a big penalty on the score. So there are, let's say, like existing systems who generate the score. Ideally, we have something which is more independent, more transparent. You know, like it could be between whoever wants to give you capital can pick the system of like scoring, because that can be your competitive advantage. And if people are comfortable to share more data and they get a better score because they can, or they're comfortable to share more information, that's fine. It creates potentially some consequences which might be not ideal, where people who are more desperate might share more data, and that could be problematic, but generally speaking, I think it's the right direction.
I think the key starting point with all of this, though, from the point of view of identity, is that once you have identity, you now have legal enforceability. And the legal like reputation systems are fine, but ultimately, if you just get your reputation damaged by reneging on a loan, the person who gave the loan is still going to be like, no, I still want to get paid. I still want to be able to use the, the traditional violence layer of the court system to be able to go after someone. And I think, again, like this is one of those things that goes against some crypto ethoses. But ultimately, if you want to go into that $400 trillion space, legal enforceability is critical, and that all starts with identity as well. Do I know the counterparty with whom I am contracting with, and do I have a way in which I can enforce something that happened on Ledger if there is no collateral via the traditional violence layer? So I think reputation's a part of it, but it's the enabling part is the identity system in the first place. What do you see, Ed? What do you see as the main roadblocks in getting identity onto the blockchain?
As a bit of a perhaps different way to answer this question, users will bring their identity onto the blockchain when they need to for a use case that they care enough about. And so I think actually, although you could talk about the infrastructure and rails that need to be built to do that in an efficient way, if a user cares enough about accessing a Web3 use case and they've put some really crappy like Web2 front end with KYC on the front, they'll still go through it. So actually, there's a lot that we can do in DeFi without having to go through any KYC AML. In my view, it's going to be a case of when there are either regulations imposed on some part of DeFi, or there are use cases that become mainstream enough, potentially using tokenized securities, where there's enough of an incentive for users to actually go and provide parts of their identity, then that will create the pull factor that will suck in all the other participants.
Yeah, I think I'm challenging at least the terminology, put them on the blockchain. I'm of the advocate, like, don't put any of that stuff on the blockchain. You need to make it available so that people who are interacting using the blockchain as the settlement layer, or as the mechanism to find and determine the price and all of the good stuff, that they can establish the trust in a secure but off-chain, more privacy-preserving way. I'm fully with you. I think we need to have good reasons to have this initial friction, or maybe it will be not just one, it might be like multiple steps until like you reach, like maybe the first time you just need an ID card, the next time you need to have proof of funds or like accredited investor, depends on like the use case. But over time you can establish this. And I think what was missing over the last, I don't know, decade was that we have the right standards. Key management is still, it's much better now, but I think it's still a big challenge. When you talk about encryption, like maybe not like designing, I think that's better with a smart contract wallet, but even there, having everything in one place is kind of scary. If you have no multiple safes and then another wallet here, it becomes a bit complicated to like keep track of this. Privacy is a concern. So there's like a bunch of like roadblocks. So I think to the answer of like what can we do, I think with a narrow use case where people have a benefit, I think it's the easiest way to get some traction, because it's a bit of a chicken and egg. Once we have it, and then the next time will be so much easier. And I think then we can grow from there.
Yeah, I agree with, with both of their answers. I think like the emergence of a standard where like people know what identity on, let's call it identity on chain. I completely agree with your point of like it being off chain, but it enables some use case on chain in a way that like people know it's a known quantity. You have tons of like YouTube videos showing you how to do it. You're a Web2 developer at JP Morgan, you can implement that in an afternoon or something like that. That's also super important. So like a single 3-bit. And one thing I can add on what you were saying, it's true that we need one use case for people to be willing to go through it so that they actually just do it. But that's true today, right? You have 400 million people on centralized exchange with what used to be, and is less and less so, a very tedious process to actually get KYC. So they actually already want to do that.
We try to convince like the Coinbases of the world for many, many years, like, hey, you have KYC, can you just not issue some form of credential to the user? But that hits some of the incentives. Like once you have done it, like why do you make it easier for the user who went through the KYC process in Coinbase to then go to another exchange or somewhere else? So there's a lot of like challenges around the incentives.
No, I think that the Y Combinator defines product market fit in the following way, which is that if you have someone who is standing there and their hair's on fire, they don't care about what they're eating today. They don't care about whether or not they're going to the gym. They just care about putting the fire out. And if you're standing there holding a brick, they might take that brick off you and bash themselves on the head with it to try and put the fire out, because that's the number one problem for them. And if you have a bucket of water, then you are going to be the most valuable person in the world. And so I think that in crypto, a lot of the time we create very transactional relationships with our users. Our relationships are based basically on this idea of pay me, or I'll pay you to do a thing, or I will create speculative opportunity so high that I just will go through the pain to do it. But you know, if you look outside of the crypto space and you see things like TikTok, and you see things like YouTube, you see things like Facebook, those things are creating user demand in an entirely different way. And I think that crypto needs to get better at working out user motivations that are more than just money to be able to work this out. I also see that there's a really interesting use case around emerging governments. Anyone who's interacted with government services knows how terrible the government services are, and because it's essentially a monopoly, you have to go through the pain and tedium of interacting with those government services. I think there's a huge opportunity in OpenFi to be helping new governments that are forming or growing to provide identity solutions to their to their citizens. And then that unlocks these millions of people, because once you have that identity that is created by a credible government, you can then unlock all of the services that are related to it. So I would love to see the blockchain space, the crypto space, doing more on working with governments as well to create great privacy-first identity solutions that enable this mass onboarding of users that can then use DeFi and OpenFi primitives afterwards.
As we speak, actually, there's two pilots going on in the EU that are working on exactly that. So there is some willingness from, including established governments, to look at this kind of thing, and it could be back and forth, and there might not be enough privacy in there, and things like that. But there are some examples of that in France as well. I have that concept called France Identité, where literally you go to a post office or whatever, you give some information about you, and they mint you a digital identity that you can reuse through various government services and things like that. It doesn't work too well so far, but it goes in the right in the direction you're talking about, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, we're just coming up on time. So I want from each of you what's the thing that you are most excited about being enabled in the next 5 years by OpenFi and digital identity. Let's start with you, Ed.
For me, it's real-world assets and securities coming on chain and giving individual people access to asset classes and asset types that they wouldn't have been able to do so before. 24/7 with virtually zero transaction costs. It's just such a huge advantage on the existing system that it seems like such a killer use case. And as we mentioned earlier, it's completely underpinned by identity.
Yeah, I think for the OpenFi, this sounds great. I feel like if we can have different teams competing with the best user experience, but have the same assets behind the scenes, I think it unlocks this composability, which I'm very excited about, because it will allow people to find the best product for them rather than this one stack, whatever PayPal has decided is the best for them. That's very exciting. I'm interested to see what it will unlock once people all care doing this because they have some financial interests. Can we use this identity now for other systems, all the stuff we were excited about in the last almost 10 years now of owning your data, because now suddenly you can onboard not only to financial institutions but to basically whatever, a car rental and anything else where it's the same kind of stuff. You need to have an identification and your driver license and your payment. And I think it can revolutionize so many other things. Once we have identity and your money or payment mechanisms, I think it will change the way how we interact online and offline.
Yeah, I second that. I think on a maybe slightly less ambitious way, but shorter term, in the next 6 months, I would love to see a new version of BlockFi, Celsius, Voyagers, those things that we saw that had huge product market fit until they crashed and burned, yeah. But in a safe way, because you put the assets on chain, you actually have some self-custody in there, and you can touch real users because with that identity concept, you can actually KYC them.
Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you very much to you guys for listening.